The shouting started before I even had the door fully open. My son, Mark, stood on my welcome mat this Friday evening, his face a mask of fury, his voice echoing down the slate-gray hallway for all my neighbors to hear. His wife, Chloe, stood just behind him, a vulture in a cashmere coat. 30 days, Dad, he bellowed, frosting a crumpled paper at my chest. You have 30 days to clear out. We're taking the apartment. Mrs. Gable from 4B cracked her door open, her eye a sliver of curiosity in the gloom. Behind me, my small apartment was silent save for the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. It was my sanctuary, the place I'd shared with his mother for 41 years. The air smelled of old books and the lemon polish I use on the tables. Every worn armchair, every faded photograph, held a piece of my life with Ellen. The cold drizzle outside seemed to seep in through the open door, chilling the peaceful warmth I had carefully cultivated since she passed. It felt like an invasion, a violation of something sacred. We need the space, Dad, Mark continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss that was somehow more menacing. Chloe's pregnant. We need a second bedroom. This place is wasted on you. Rattling around in here all alone. You can find a small room somewhere in the suburbs. Chloe gave a thin, rehearsed smile, placing a hand on a stomach that was as flat as a board. It was a performance, and the entire fourth floor was their stage. They were counting on my shame to make me compliant. I said nothing. My mind, however, was already flipping through the worn pages of a document tucked away in my desk. I remembered old Mr. Henderson, the original landlord, a man whose handshake was as solid as steel. He'd looked me and Ellen in the eye back in 1984. "You're good people, Arthur," he'd said. "This is your home for as long as you want it." Mark, of course, wouldn't remember that. He was only a teenager then, too busy complaining about the size of his allowance to pay attention to adult matters. Chloe stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Think of it, Arthur. The nice, quiet retirement community. They have activities. Bingo. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." Her eyes, however, were scanning the apartment over my shoulder, mentally measuring the walls for new paint and tearing down the life Ellen and I had built. She was calculating the resale value of my memories, and a number she landed on pleased her. Her gaze was as cold and hard as polished stone. My hand, deep in the pocket of my cardigan, closed around a small, cool cylinder of metal and brass, a spare 15-amp fuse I'd been meaning to put in my toolbox. I'd been an electrician my whole life, a master of circuits and currents, of understanding how things connect. I knew that the smallest, most overlooked component could control the entire system. It was a truth that people like Mark and Chloe, who only saw the big, shiny appliances, could never understand. The fuse felt heavy, a small anger in the storm of their greed. The door to 4B creaked open a little wider. Mrs. Gable was now fully visible, clutching her robe at the neck, her face a mixture of pity and alarm. Across the hall, Mr. Chen pretended to be collecting his mail, his movements suddenly slow and deliberate. Mark saw them, and instead of shame, a flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. He wanted witnesses. He wanted to document my defeat, to create a public narrative where I was the stubborn old man and he was the long-suffering son, forced to take drastic measures. He shoved the paper at me again. I took it this time. It wasn't a legal document. It was a letter, typed up on his work computer, full of phrases like notice to vacate and termination of informal tenancy. It was a scare tactic, a piece of paper designed to look intimidating to a 72-year-old man he believed was losing his faculties. The arrogance was breathtaking. He thought a few threatening words were enough to erase 40 years of history and a legally binding contract. "This two-bedroom is worth $1.2 million now, Dad," Chloe added, her voice sharp as glass. 1.2. Do you have any idea how much equity you're just sitting on? We could use that. Lily's college fund. A new car. It's selfish to keep it all to yourself. They spoke of my home as if it were a stock certificate, an asset to be liquidated. They saw only the dollar signs, blind to the life lived within these four walls. The first steps of their own child, taken on this very floor. I simply folded the paper neatly in half and put it in my pocket, next to the spare fuse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just looked at my son, at the man he had become, and felt a profound and chilling calm settle over me. My silence was a language he'd never learned to speak, and it unnerved him. His agitation grew, his face becoming redder. He needed a fight, a screaming match to validate his aggression. I refused to give it to him. My gaze drifted to the window at the end of the hall, the one overlooking the park. Ellen had loved that view. She used to say she could tell the seasons just by the color of the maple tree, from the pale green of spring to the fiery burst of autumn. "It's our masterpiece, Artie," she would whisper, her head on my shoulder. To them, it was just a window. To me, it was a portrait of our life together. Selling this place wouldn't just be losing an apartment. It would be losing the last tangible piece of her. "We're doing this for your own good," Mark insisted, his voice taking on a righteous tone. "Just like we helped you with the car." My jaw tightened. Helping with the car had involved him convincing me my trusty 2008 sedan was unsafe, selling it to a friend of his for $1,500, and pocketing the cash while I was left taking the bus. He'd told me it barely fetched scrap value. But that was only half the truth. The other half was that his friend had listed it online for $8,000 the very next day. Chloe was already redecorating. "We'll paint these depressing walls a nice slate gray," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Get rid of all this old dusty furniture. Modernize the place. It has good bones." She dismissed my entire life as clutter, as a prelude to her own superior existence. The casual cruelty of it was a physical blow. She wasn't just trying to take my home. She was trying to erase me from it before I was even gone. She was burying me alive. Through it all, the low hum of the refrigerator continued its steady rhythm from the kitchen. It was the apartment's heartbeat. It had been there through fevers and holiday dinners, through arguments and anniversaries. It was the sound of constancy, a quiet thrum of reliability in a world that was becoming increasingly loud and unstable. It was the sound of home, a sound they were intent on silencing forever, replacing it with the shrill noise of their own entitlement and greed. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their noise like a razor. "Mark, did you ever read the lease? The one your mother and I signed on March 12th, 1984? It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of 4 decades. I had co-signed him onto it 15 years ago so he could build a credit history, a favor he had long since forgotten. I watched his face, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint that he understood the ground he was standing on. He scoffed, a short, barking laugh. "The lease? Dad, what are you talking about? That was 100 years ago." "It doesn't matter. We're the owners now." Chloe rolled her eyes. "He's confused, Mark. It's the age. Their arrogance was a shield, protecting them from the one thing that could undo them. The facts. They had built their entire plan on the assumption of my weakness, my ignorance, and my decay. They never imagined I would remember the details. For them, the past was a scrap heap. For me, it was an arsenal. Without another word, I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a quiet, definite click that echoed in the sudden silence of the hallway. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening to their indignant muttering fade as they walked towards the elevator. The public performance was over. My home was mine again, at least for a few moments. The silence they left behind was vast and empty, filled only with the steady, reassuring hum of the old refrigerator. I walked back into my living room and switched on a lamp. The warm, yellow light filled the space, chasing the shadows into the corners. I pulled the crumpled letter from my pocket and smoothed it out on the coffee table. The words blurred for a moment. It wasn't the fake legal jargon that stung. It was the signature at the bottom. "Sincerely, your son, Mark." He had weaponized our relationship, turning a word that should mean love and respect into a threat, a tool of extortion. I went to my old roll-top desk, the one my own father, a carpenter, had built. The wood was dark and smooth under my fingertips. I unlocked the bottom drawer, the one that always stuck a little in the summer humidity. Inside, beneath a stack of old tax returns and appliance warranties, was a thick, worn manila folder labeled simply, "Apartment." My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted it out. This folder was the foundation of my entire life in this city, the bedrock on which everything else had been built. I opened the folder. On top was the original lease agreement, its pages yellowed and soft with age. The text was from a typewriter, the letters slightly uneven. I ran my thumb over the signatures at the bottom. My own, strong and sure even then. Ellen's, a graceful looping script, and Mr. Henderson's, a bold, confident slash of ink. This wasn't just paper. It was a covenant, a promise made between people who understood the meaning of a person's home. A promise Mark was about to learn was still very much in effect. I remembered the day we signed it. Ellen was pregnant with Mark. Mr. Henderson had given her a glass of milk and me a small glass of whiskey to celebrate. "This building isn't an investment for me," he'd said, his voice gravelly. "It's a community. You look after your apartment, you pay your rent, and this is your home for life. My word on it." And his word was right there, codified in a special addendum that his lawyer had insisted on adding, just to make it official. My hand went back into my pocket and retrieved the spare fuse. I placed it on the desk, a tiny silver and glass sentinel next to the faded blue ink of the lease. One was a promise of light, a guarantee that a circuit would be completed and power would flow. The other was a promise of shelter, a guarantee of a place in the world. Both were small, easily overlooked things that held immense power. Both were instruments of my trade, my world of order, and they would see me through this. Beneath the lease was a newer, crisper document. It was a letter from the faceless corporation that had bought the building after Mr. Henderson passed. It was dated May 10th, 2022. I had sent them a registered letter inquiring about my tenancy status, a premonition perhaps. Their legal department had replied, confirming that all terms, conditions, and addenda of the original 1984 lease agreement for Unit 4A remain in full force and effect, and have been grandfathered into our system. I had their confirmation in writing. I sat back, the leather of my chair groaning softly. I thought about the desperate, hungry look in Mark's eyes. I'd heard snippets from my granddaughter Lily about their money troubles, a failed business venture, a car they couldn't afford, credit card debt spiraling out of control. This wasn't about a new baby. It was a hostile takeover. They wanted to sell my life to pay for their mistakes, and they were willing to humiliate me, to cast me out into the street to do it. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Grandpa." The voice was small, hesitant. It was Lily, Mark's 17-year-old daughter. "Dad told me not to call you. He said you were being difficult, but I heard them talking. Are you okay? Is it true they're making you move out?" Her voice was filled with a genuine concern that felt like a lifeline in a cold sea. She was the one good circuit in a faulty system. "I'm okay, Lilypad," I said, using the old nickname I gave her when she was little. "Don't you worry about me. Your father and I are just having a disagreement about housekeeping." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I wanted to tell her the truth, but how do you tell a child that her father is a thief and her mother is his accomplice? You don't. You shield her. You absorb the blow yourself. "You just focus on your schoolwork," I told her. "Everything will be fine." The next afternoon, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm downtown, Blackwood, Kane and Associates. It was a formal notice to quit, citing a non-existent verbal agreement and accusing me of violating 3 separate building bylaws, including creating a noise disturbance and improper storage of materials in a common area. The accusations were so absurd, they were almost laughable. I hadn't stored anything in the hall since Mark's tricycle in 1982. It was another escalation, another attempt to drown me in paper. I spread the lawyer's letter on the table next to Mark's pathetic note. It was printed on heavy cream-colored bond paper, meant to convey power and authority. But I knew that paper could be a weapon for the weak as well as the strong. I remembered Ellen, years ago, facing down a condescending school principal who tried to blame Mark for a fight someone else started. She hadn't raised her voice. She had just calmly presented the facts until the man crumbled. "Never let a bully's noise drown out the truth, Artie," she'd said. My phone rang. It was Mark, Did you get the letter from Mr. Kane? He asked, his voice smug. This is serious now, Dad. We're not fooling around. His clock started ticking the second you signed for it. That's $450 an hour of our money you're wasting by being stubborn. Pack your things. The precision of the number, the casual way he threw it around, was designed to make me feel small and poor, to make me feel like my resistance was costing him a fortune he couldn't afford. Instead of calling a lawyer, I took the bus to the city records office. The air inside was thick with the dusty smell of old paper and decaying glue. I spent 2 hours scrolling through microfiche, then digital archives, tracing the ownership of my building. It was exactly as I remembered. Henderson Properties sold to a REIT in 1999, which was then absorbed by the current conglomerate, Vesta Holdings, in 2017. Every transfer deed explicitly mentioned that all existing lease agreements and their covenants would be honored. The chain was unbroken. I found something else, too. A copy of a utility authorization form from 2005. Mark had offered to have the building's supplemental heating bill sent to him directly, claiming it was easier for him to pay it online than for me to write a check. Let me handle it, Dad. It's nothing. I saw it as a kindness, a son helping his aging father. Now I saw it for what it was, an anchor, a piece of official mail with his name and my address, a way to establish a foothold. But that was only half the truth. The other half was that he'd used it to slowly build a case, a flimsy portfolio of documents suggesting he was a resident, a caretaker. Chloe was waiting for me in the lobby when I got home, holding a handful of paint swatches. Arthur, she chirped, fanning them out like a deck of cards. We're thinking of a nice mineral gray for the living room, to really bring out the light. Have you had any luck finding a new place? The good ones go so fast these days. Her smile was a predatory slash. The next morning, another text from Mark. Painters are coming for an estimate on the 15th. We need the keys by then so they can measure properly. Please confirm. The audacity was stunning. They were scheduling contractors for a home I still lived in, a property they had absolutely no legal right to. They were trying to create an artificial timeline, a sense of inevitability. They weren't just pushing me out, they were trying to gaslight me into thinking the decision had already been made, and I was just a stubborn obstacle for a single, weary moment. I felt the full weight of my 72 years. The fight seemed exhausting. The constant pressure, the legal threats, the coldness in my son's voice. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a stubborn old man rattling around in a space too big for him. The quiet of the apartment suddenly felt like emptiness. The city outside my window, once a vibrant panorama, seemed gray and hostile. The temptation to just give in, to find a quiet room and fade away, was immense. Then my eyes landed on the photograph on the mantelpiece. Ellen and I, younger, laughing on a park bench. She had her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling. We had saved for years for the deposit on this place. We had painted these walls ourselves, celebrated birthdays and mourned losses within them. This apartment wasn't just a collection of rooms. It was the physical archive of our love story. Letting them take it wouldn't be giving up a lease. It would be a betrayal of her memory. And that I could not do. I went back to the manila folder and pulled out the lease. My fingers found the specific page, the addendum Mr. Henderson's lawyer had drafted. Paragraph 7b. The lifetime tenancy clause. It stated the lease was mine for life, at a rent controlled by the city's original 1984 guidelines. It was ironclad. But the next clause, 7c, was the one Mark was banking on, and the one he had profoundly misunderstood. It outlined the strict conditions for passing tenancy to a co-signed heir. It was my shield, but it could also become my sword. The next day, I walked to the electronics store on the corner and bought a digital voice recorder for $49.99. It was no bigger than my thumb. The instructions were simple, the operation nearly silent. A tiny red light glowed when it was active. I practiced in my living room, recording the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock. This was my new tool. I had spent my life working with wires and circuits, directing power where it needed to go. This was no different. I just needed to capture the truth and channel it. I was heading out to get groceries when I heard their voices. I had just locked my door and was waiting by the elevator lobby, tucked in the small alcove by the stairwell. The elevator door slid open, and Mark and Chloe were inside, their backs to me. They were arguing in vicious, hushed tones, unaware I was just 10 feet away. The lobby's slate floor seemed to amplify every bitter syllable. It was a gift from the universe, a chance to hear the truth when their masks were off. "It's not working, Mark," Chloe hissed. "He's not scared. Just tell him about the foreclosure. We have to be out of the house by the 30th. The bank isn't giving us another extension." Mark's reply was a low growl. "If he knows we're desperate, we lose all our leverage. He'll just wait us out. We have to make him believe this is about the baby, about our future. We keep pushing. He's old. He'll break." Their words hung in the air, cold and sharp as ice. The doors slid shut, and they were gone. I stood in the silence, my grocery bag hanging forgotten from my hand. Foreclosure. A fake pregnancy. It all clicked into place with the cold, hard certainty of a deadbolt sliding home. This wasn't about family expansion. It was about a financial implosion. They were sinking, and they planned to use my home, my life, as a raft, leaving me to drown. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Their plan was not just greedy, it was monstrous. Back in my apartment, I walked to the desk and picked up the small fuse. I rolled it between my thumb and forefinger. It was a safety device, designed to break a circuit during a power surge, to prevent a fire. That's what my son and his wife were, a power surge of greed and desperation, threatening to burn down everything I had built. I had to break the circuit. I had to cut the power. The anger was gone, replaced by a chilling, slate-gray clarity. I knew exactly how it would end. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. My voice was steady, even gentle. "Mark, it's Dad. I've been thinking. Perhaps we've all been a bit too emotional about this. You're right. I don't need all this space. Why don't you and Chloe come by tomorrow morning, say 10 o'clock? We can sit down and discuss the terms of my moving out." I was laying the bait, carefully crafting the trap with the one thing he couldn't resist, the scent of victory. His belief was palpable, even through the phone. "Dad, that's great, really great. I knew you'd see reason once you thought it over," he gushed. "Of course. We'll be there at 10. We can bring coffee. This is the right thing to do for everyone." He thought he had won. He thought the old man had finally broken. His arrogance made him blind and deaf to the tone in my voice, to the cold, hard floor he was about to step on. He was walking willingly into the cage. That night, I didn't pack a single box. Instead, I sat at my dining room table and prepared my case. I laid out the original 1984 lease, open to the addendum page. Next to it, I placed the 2022 letter from Vesta Holdings confirming the lease's terms. On the other side, I put the intimidating letter from their lawyer. In the center, I placed a tiny digital voice recorder. These were my tools. This was my circuit board. All the components were in place, waiting for the switch to be thrown. I saw the face of the boy I taught to fish, to change a tire, to treat people with respect. Where had he gone? Was he buried so deep beneath this desperate, grasping man that he could never be recovered? A wave of profound sorrow washed over me. This wasn't a victory I would celebrate. It was a necessary amputation. Sometimes, to save the body, you have to cut off a part that has become poisoned. It was a grim, heartbreaking necessity. As the dawn broke, casting long, gray shadows across the living room, a sense of absolute certainty settled in my chest. This was no longer just about defending my home. It was about a final, painful lesson in consequences. They had chosen to build their lives on a foundation of lies and entitlement, and they had mistaken my quiet dignity for weakness. But an old electrician knows one thing for sure. You never, ever underestimate the power of a well-grounded circuit. I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, the one Ellen loved, and watched the city wake up. The sounds of traffic began to swell. The sky lightened from black to slate, then to a pale, watery blue. I was calm. There was no rage, no fear, just a quiet, humming readiness. I was a generator, fully charged, waiting for the demand. They believed they were coming to accept my surrender. In truth, they were coming to their own arraignment. and I was to be the judge, jury, and witness. My granddaughter Lily texted me just after 9. Dad and Chloe are on their way. They sound happy. Please be nice, Grandpa. They're just stressed. Her innocence was a sharp pang in my heart. Don't worry, sweet girl. Everything will be very clear, very soon, I replied. I hated that she would be hurt in the fallout, but the truth, however ugly, was better than the elaborate lie she was living in. She deserved to know who her parents really were. This was for her, too. At precisely 10 a.m., the doorbell chimed its cheerful two-note song. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet apartment. I stood, my joints protesting slightly, and walked to the door. I reached into my shirt pocket, my thumb finding the small, ridged button on the side of the recorder. With a nearly silent click, a tiny red light blinked once, and then went dark. The device was active. The record was spinning. The final performance was about to be captured for posterity. I opened the door. Mark and Chloe stood there beaming, holding a box of donuts from the expensive bakery downtown. "Morning, Dad," Mark said, his voice booming with false cheer. "Ready to make a deal?" Chloe swept past me, her eyes already measuring the living room walls again. "This place has so much potential," she murmured, setting the donuts on the coffee table as if she already owned it. They walked into the lion's den, believing it was their new living room. I closed the door and gestured for them to sit on the sofa opposite my armchair. "No donuts for me, thank you," I said, my voice even. "Let's get straight to business." I sat down and folded my hands over my knee. The documents were still laid out on the end table beside me, just out of their immediate line of sight. They sat, leaning forward eagerly, like two wolves sensing a kill. The air was thick with their smug anticipation, a stark contrast to the quiet, methodical ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. So I began, keeping my tone conversational. "What exactly are the terms you're proposing?" Mark leaned back, spreading his arms across the back of the sofa. "It's simple. You sign a quitclaim, vacating the premises within 30 days. In exchange, we'll cover the first month's rent on a new place for you. Up to $1,500. It's a generous offer, Dad. More than we can really afford. But for you, we'll make it work." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. "Generous," I repeated, letting the word go flat. "And if I refuse?" Chloe sighed dramatically. "Arthur, please don't be difficult. We have Mr. Kane on retainer. He's already drawn up the eviction papers. It would get messy and public. Think of your neighbors. Think of Lily. Is that really what you want? To be dragged out by the sheriff? Over some dusty old apartment?" The threat was queer. The emotional blackmail laid bare. I leaned forward and picked up the lawyer's letter from the table, holding it by a corner as if it were something soiled. "This letter? The one that claims I'm a public nuisance? Based on what evidence?" Mark waved a dismissive hand. "Mr. Kane has his ways. He has affidavits, witnesses. It was a bluff, and we both knew it. But he was counting on me not having the nerve to call it. He was betting on my fear. The small recorder in my pocket captured every syllable. It was time. "You know, Mark," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "I was thinking about the lease, the one you co-signed all those years ago." I picked up the old yellow document. I've read it again, very carefully. Mark's smile tightened. "Dad, the lease is irrelevant. It's ancient history." "Is it?" I asked, "because Vesta Holdings, the people who own this building, sent me a letter last year confirming that this ancient history is, in fact, current and legally binding company policy." I slid their letter across the table. Chloe snatched it up. I watched her face as she read it, the smug confidence draining away, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then alarm. Her eyes darted from the letterhead to the signature. "This? What is this?" she stammered. "It's a fact," I said calmly. "Something you and your very expensive lawyer seem to have overlooked in your rush to declare me homeless. This apartment is mine, for life, under the original terms. That's not up for debate. But that's only the interesting part." Mark stood up, his face flushing with anger. "This is a trick. Some old piece of paper you dug up. It means nothing." His voice was rising again, the familiar bellow returning. "It means everything," I said, my own voice remaining quiet, cutting through his rage. "But you're right. That paper only says I can stay. It's the other part of the lease, the part about you, that we need to discuss now, specifically Addendum 7C, which you co-signed, but clearly never read. I let my words sink in, watching the realization dawn on Mark's face that this was not going the way he had planned. He was no longer in control. The power in the room had shifted, flowing away from their aggressive demands and pooling around my quiet armchair. The hum of the old refrigerator seemed to grow louder, a steady, implacable presence. It was the sound of a foundation that would not crack, of a current that could not be reversed. Addendum 7C, I continued, is the heir tenancy clause. It stipulates that a co-signed family member can assume the lease upon the primary tenant's death or voluntary relinquishment. Mark's face brightened. Exactly. So just sign the relinquishment. Ah, I said, holding up a finger. But it also includes a crucial subclause, 7C Part 2. It states that any attempt by the co-signed heir to harass, intimidate, or otherwise illegally compel the primary tenant to vacate renders the heir's future claim on the tenancy null and void, permanently. The color drained from Mark's face. Chloe stared, her mouth slightly agape. "You're lying," she whispered. "That can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," I said. Mr. Henderson was a wise man. He wanted to protect his tenants from exactly this, from predatory family members. And your lawyer, Mark, for $450 an hour. He should have read the foundational document before sending a letter full of baseless accusations. Because that letter, coupled with your public shouting in the hall, is a textbook example of illegal compulsion. I leaned forward and pressed the stop button on the recorder in my pocket. Then I pulled it out and placed it gently on the coffee table, next to the box of untouched donuts. The tiny black object seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "And the best part," I said, my voice a soft, surgical whisper, "is that I have a full recording of this entire conversation, including your generous offer to commit perjury with fake witnesses and your admission that this is about bullying me out." Silence. A deep, profound silence, broken only by the ticking clock. Chloe looked like she had been turned to stone. Mark's face was a mottled canvas of shock, rage, and dawning, horrified understanding. He had walked into the room a conqueror. He was now a defendant, and I held all the evidence. He stared at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake, coiled and ready to strike. The entire edifice of his plan, built on bluster and lies, had just been demolished by a single, overlooked paragraph. I stood up, the old man they underestimated, and walked to my desk. I picked up a pen and a fresh piece of paper. "Here's my counteroffer," I said, my back to them. "You are going to write a letter to Vesta Holdings, effective immediately, relinquishing your co-signed status on this lease, and forfeiting any and all future claims to this tenancy. You will state that the decision is voluntary and made for personal reasons. You will sign it, and Chloe will sign as a witness." The words were cold, hard, and non-negotiable. Mark finally thawed his voice, a strangled rasp. "And if I don't?" "If you don't," I said, turning to face him, "a copy of this lease, a copy of your lawyer's fraudulent letter, and a digital file of this entire conversation will be sent to the Vesta Holdings legal department, the district attorney's office on a complaint of elder abuse and attempted housing fraud. And, dear daughter, Lily, I wonder how she'll feel about the fake pregnancy and the foreclosure you've been hiding from her." Chloe made a small, wounded sound. The mention of Lily was the final, devastating blow. This wasn't just about money or housing anymore. It was about the complete and utter destruction of their family's facade. Mark looked at Chloe, and in that one desperate glance, I saw the entire pathetic, rotten structure of their marriage. They were partners in a crime that had just spectacularly failed. There was no love there, only shared liability. I placed the blanked paper and my pen on the dining table. "You have made my home a battlefield," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, "and you have lost. You have 30 seconds to decide whether you want to lose this apartment or whether you want to lose everything else as well. Your choice." I then walked to the window, turned my back on them, and began to count silently to 30, watching the bare branches of the maple tree sway in the wind. I heard the scrape of a chair, the scratch of a pen on paper. I didn't turn around. I heard Mark's ragged breathing, then a choked sob from Chloe. The sounds of their defeat were ugly and raw in the quiet of my living room. They had come to feast on my life, and now they were being forced to sign away their own pathetic ambitions. The silence that followed the frantic scratching of the pen was heavier than any shout had been. "It's done," Mark said, his voice a dead monotone. I turned. The paper was on the table, 2 signatures scrawled at the bottom. I walked over, picked it up, and read it carefully. Every word was as I had dictated. It was a full and unconditional surrender. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket, alongside the tiny recorder that had been their undoing. They were still sitting at the table, hollowed-out shells of the smug boys who had arrived an hour earlier. Without another word, I walked to the door and opened it. I stood there, holding it open, waiting. The message was clear. Their presence was no longer tolerated in my home. Mark stood, his movements stiff and robotic. Chloe followed, refusing to meet my eyes. As they passed me in the doorway, Mark paused. He looked at me, his eyes filled, not with remorse, but with a pure, undiluted hatred. "You'll regret this," he whispered, a final, impotent threat. I said nothing. His words had no more power here. I watched them walk down the slate-gray hall toward the elevator, their shoulders slumped in defeat. They didn't speak to each other. When they were gone, I looked down at the spare fuse still sitting on my end table. I picked it up, walked to the fuse box in the hall closet, opened the metal door, and gently pushed the small cylinder into the one empty slot. I closed the panel with a firm, satisfying click.